Hello and welcome everyone to today's podcast, which is featuring a star-filled panel. Today I'm stoked to be joined by Nader, who is the Director of Developer Relationships at Eigen Labs, Chase, who is the Partnership Manager at Off-Chain Labs, Naruto, part of the Veil team, and Harry, who is the Docs lead at NodeOps, so part of the core team and a colleague of mine. Today's conversation will be wide-ranging, addressing the current state of DePIN, understanding whether decentralized compute infrastructure is a viable alternative to centralized compute infrastructure, discussing DePIN's evolution over time, and much more. That said, I think it'd be suitable to break the ice by getting straight into it. So this is an open-ended question. Whichever one of you guys can take it, is: do you guys think that decentralized compute can compete with the likes of, AWS, Azure, GCP, or is there still something missing from our end?
Well, I can kind of just give my perspective, having worked at AWS for almost 4 years. I feel like the core focus around a lot of the stuff that we were doing was around latency and just optimization of what we had. We were way past the point of scalability. There were rarely any actual scalability challenges there. It was more about performance and that was kind of the reducing costs, improving performance. Where I feel like in the crypto space and kind of building, in this fashion, we're still left with a lot of challenges around performance and around scalability. So I think when you kind of think about how distributed kind of systems work in the traditional sense versus how we have to deal with things like consensus and peer-to-peer networks, I feel like we're always going to be somewhat maybe behind in terms of performance. If we kind of build using traditional crypto primitives, I would say, because of the simple fact that you do have these restrictions around consensus. But I do think that there are ways to get around that, right? So I do think that products like EigenLayer, where you're essentially removing all of that, all the limitations around blockchain, all of just the general limitations that you typically have around blockchain infrastructure, and you were instead left with the verification and a lot of the properties that you want without the restrictions, and you're instead operating in I would say an optimistic type of model where you have slashing as opposed to consensus. So I think that we can get there with this type of model. So I think we're just now starting to kind of see people try to explore that and kind of see, where that can get them. Whether we can be one-to-one with AWS around performance, that's another question. I do think with cost, though, that we're going to be a lot less expensive and in the blockchain, crypto, whatever, Web3 space, due to some of the different mechanisms that people are using to build out these protocols. One of them just utilizing idle compute, where people already have their machines running and they're opting into this network. And we're already seeing costs of maybe one order of magnitude less expensive, which is really interesting to see, because it's not typically a value proposition you think of when you think of cryptocurrencies or crypto in general. It's reducing the cost of GPU, but you're actually seeing that start to play out a little bit.
I would sort of latch onto that and say we'll see different niches emerge. AWS, Azure, and GCP. I mean, OpenAI or Anthropic probably isn't going to get rid of their AWS or Azure subscription anytime soon. But what we might start to see is more of your independent model trainers, your hacktivists out there actually going to the decentralized solutions, because some of them are cost competitive, if not cheaper, than the centralized providers that exist today. It's just a lot harder to get, you know, um, Nestle, for example, outside of off of their AWS subscription, or Netflix off of their AWS subscription. That takes years and years, and it's I don't even know the exact path a decentralized protocol would take to go about signing Netflix as a customer, for example. But there are a lot of viable alternatives out there in terms of, you know, small 5, 10-person companies in India, in Kansas, in Latin America that can utilize decentralized compute. And then also, if they have compute, contribute said compute to the network and even earn some rewards or have their subscription almost paid for by the compute that they're contributing when it's idle.
Yeah, Chase, I think that's a nice way of thinking about it is like people can use the resources that they've got available and actually leverage those when they're sitting idle, like being able to rent your property when you're not in it. And on your point, Nadev, on the idea of the can we compete on the efficiencies that someone like AWS has spent years like optimizing for? And one of the things I like about this model is it's using blockchain, which is a terribly slow database, for the validity of the system. But that shouldn't act as a choke point to actually serving the compute. The compute providers just hand over that machine to allow the workloads to run. So that slow, painful consensus layer of the blockchain is hopefully building in cost efficiencies, because what you're doing is you're adding a level of trustlessness. So when I test this in the real world, people are like, but how do I know my service will keep going? And the answer is, well, if the provider fails to provide that service, they suffer slashing. And you can see somebody who's like renting compute from GCP or AWS going, but then the service disruption happened. Like, it doesn't matter that they got slashed, I suffered. But I suspect that what's going to happen is there's going to be a level of trust in the process. Like, people have to learn to trust that people behave appropriately, because if they don't, they are economically disincentivized. And so I think that's possibly one of the areas we need to overcome. Is it's a new system to enforce a service level agreement. We have to kind of overcome the friction of people understanding that this is a trustless way of monitoring a compute network. Does that make sense?
Um, I have a little bit of like different views. I agree with everyone over here, but I'm one of those guys who like to question everything, just out of curiosity. So DePIN, I've worked with AWS as an intern. I have friends who have worked at AWS. I've built things on GCP as well. The problem here is that the way GCP, Azure, and AWS have scaled, um, Web3 hasn't achieved that yet, right? And when they bring in tokenomics and then, like people to run a small node at their basement or at their home for any kind of deep in stuff, it creates another complexity. Then there's a token price. So the problem is that there's too many complexity for the average Web2 user to be using DePIN, unless we abstract that away, right? So I think Helium is doing really good work with I think they have the mobile plans for that. So Helium is based on Solana. They came up with something nice. NodeOps doing cool things. So there are a few good projects that are doing really cool work, but the economics or the tokenomics of DePIN lacks a little bit of leeway, or the bullishness that can be improved, and that is all that needs to be improved. So basically, like you scale fast, you make sure that a lot of people are happy with it, and there's no complexity because it's abstracted away, and then the tokenomics is in such a way that people do make money, but it's not like anyone can dump on them hugely. But yeah,
Yeah,
those are some views.
very important that the tokenomics doesn't like bespoke in the system's own wheel. So one of the things we're doing at NodeOps is, of course, rather than the cost being valued in Node, the token, the baseline is USD, so that the tokenomics won't affect if there is a sudden fluctuation, volatility in the token price, that will have less impact. So I agree, it's very important to have a logical tokenomics that is not vulnerable to the swings and fortunes of what's going on in the greater market.
Yeah, I mean, and something that I also agree with Chase mentioned is the adoption, right? In the sense that what made me gravitate towards DePIN immediately was how intuitive it would be as a solution to I wouldn't say David versus Goliath, but you know what I mean? There's obvious inefficiencies with some of the big supply chains for some of the big industries out there. And smaller players leveraging, decentralized networks and everything could start, I wouldn't say stealing, but eroding their market share and come up with those initial use cases that can then lead a movement, you could say. I wouldn't necessarily say that they will take over Web2 solutions, because I think that would be pretty unrealistic, but definitely coexist, right? So I think we're definitely at the beginning, or even like embryo/nascent stage, right? What I want to ask you guys is, how will that adoption actually look like, right? It's not necessarily about you making predictions, but do you think that we'll need that killer example such as Helium or us, NodeUps, that will then make everyone else sort of open their eyes and say, hey, like, I think we could do this, or there's a specific template, or what can I say, set of moves to do, and then we can achieve that level of success, or it will be more of a combined collective effort of multiple examples?
If I can jump in on that, I agree with Chase. I think he's got his finger on the pulse there, that it's going to be those smaller software houses that first start kind of like considering other alternatives to ending up with vendor lock-in with one of the big cloud providers. I also suspect that there's a playbook where people will be looking to have a multi-cloud setup. So in the Masari report that they put out, they did a wonderful example. It followed very shortly after CrowdStrike, and both Azure went down and AWS went down. And it's after big outages like that I think companies really kind of like take a look at, like, could we have at least supported some level of service by using a different provider. So I suspect a DePIN marketplace is ripe to assist on those kind of edge cases, as well as those smaller software houses that are looking to actually be very efficient when it comes to their budgets.
I think you're always one breakthrough app or one breakthrough company away from totally blowing the lid off this thing, basically. I was listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about how Snowflake is one of AWS's largest customers, but they've been an AWS customer from day one. So one of these smaller development companies that we've been touching on might use NodeOps from day one, and they might scale with NodeOps because NodeOps has been a great partner to them. They continue to achieve great pricing with great performance, and they have somewhat of a vendor lock-in, and NodeOps is able to scale through their partners. And you see the same thing in blockchain ecosystems like a layer one or layer two ecosystem, where GMX in the early days of Arbitrum definitely contributed a lot to the TVL volume user growth of Arbitrum. And you saw it with Pump Fund on Solana. You've seen it with Base and Virtual. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, interesting. I hope it's not a vendor lock-in. I hope it's purely because the service is wonderful. But yes, maybe that will be it. That trust. So that's what's interesting to me. So there's a very old saying, business travels at the speed of trust. And what Chase is describing there is somebody kind of sets up a software house and a tool and uses something like the DePIN network because first for price reasons, or because they really need a multi-region, as in geographically distributed architecture. But then because of successful ongoing workloads in production, they've built the trust. And one of the designs we're putting into the system is we understand that people build trust with their partners. So when you go and select compute from the marketplace, you'll literally be able to recognize the provider and select for that provider. So I'm not going to put anything very sensitive as a workload on a machine that could be sitting in somebody's basement, because they've got physical access to that machine. Whereas I might be willing to run some data modeling or some data cleanup that if that goes down, if it's fiddled with in any way, I'm not so bothered. Whereas running my app that provides business services, I'm probably going to choose a provider that's got SOC 2 compliance and has a serious security around their actual server room. So I suspect you're right again there, Chase. I'm becoming a fangirl here. I mean, because of that positive experience, people tend to stick around because they've built that level of trust in the business partnership. Yeah, I think that could be a a good moment for an expanding DePIN.
Right. But I also do think that, what can I say? When you have it so good with the current, like you mentioned Nestle, right, Chase, or Netflix, Spotify, just like the Goliaths of the world, right, of the world. So when they have it so good with the current centralized cloud infrastructure providers, such as the ones, the names that we mentioned, in order for the average person to actually wake up, you need, I wouldn't say necessarily a black swan event, but something that is immediately sort of close to them, right? And they can understand and comprehend. So this was going to be my next question to you, is like, what do you think of because obviously the centralized infrastructure options shortcomings become the DePIN USPs, right? So for example, like opaque pricing, vendor lock-in, censorship resistance from a DePIN perspective. Like, if you had to, I wouldn't say bet, but like, which one do you think of these would be most easily understood by the average person and say, hey, like, okay, now I understand why DePIN, the value added benefit of, and then delve into it, you know what I mean? Like how to get red pilled. Because I think there's a lot of human sort of psychology and how they think about decision making to take into account, right? When you've had it so good up until now.
I feel like what this product is essentially in the perspective of the user or the consumer of this, is just a traditional like Web 2 product. So it just needs to be better at a few things to the extent that it actually just makes sense. I don't think we should explain to them like anything about crypto or DePIN or anything, to be honest. It just needs to be a better product, and then they're gonna understand the trade-offs between this one and the other one. And then they're gonna be like, oh, this is what I want. I'm gonna either buy it or use it or invest in it or whatever. And then if they start to dive into the mechanics of it, maybe they get into the DePIN part. But I think it's different than blockchain technology, because the usage of a blockchain is its own domain that is not that well understood by a lot of people. But this is already well understood. We're just kind of replacing the underlying like architecture of how it's built, I guess. But the users and the usage and all that is going to be kind of the same, right? So this is just my opinion, though. It's kind of going to end up being more of like if you can build a better product, then people will get interested. You don't have to kind of dive into any of that stuff, maybe.
Yeah, I think this has been the purpose of blockchain and Web3 since the beginning. It's not about, we've spent so many years in the trenches talking about, sweating about the security and the protocols and how they're going to work. But in reality, we need to be at the point where the end user is just not thinking about that at all. We need to be abstracting away all of this. So of course we have to, as a company, we have to talk about how this system works in the early days. But I think the breakthrough moment is when we're literally just talking to the customer about the cloud compute.
I think one another thing is like a lot of these times, when you're taking services from, AWS, Azure, GCP, any of these, right? A lot of dependency is on these teams. If something, is not going right on their end, you may lose access to your own, software platform, whatever you're building on top of it. That's a big problem. And I think, like that's how Ethereum started, right? The idea of decentralization. So I think when you start doing some of these DePIN projects and then they start scaling up a lot of these cloud computing as well, it starts showing up that people are actively running these nodes. And because they are actively running these nodes, there's always probably some way for them to keep the network alive rather than, like having one point of failure. So basically you're mitigating the risk for centralization. And I think that's one of the biggest factors that people should be knowing when we try to scale to, let's say, other USPs or Web2 USPs, especially in like small towns, small villages, in developing countries. It really works out.
Yeah, the idea that your supplier can turn off your business, it's quite a bizarre power dynamic that's kind of arisen from the consolidation of compute down to these large service providers. And it's an uncomfortable business risk to be sitting with, that one entity can flick the switch on your production.
Exactly. And like, even if like AWS, Azure, they're like very good actors, and they would never intentionally do it. But in a lot of like local markets or like, smaller countries, there are always like, I wouldn't say knockoff but their own versions of cloud computing services that people use. And those can be considered a little bit of like, power plays where people would want to like shut down because you're doing too well or like anything, right? But these are not exactly on a brand equal to AWS, where like you can reach out to AWS and you can say, hey, this is the thing, and then you can sue AWS. But in the local countries or like, developing countries, it becomes an issue because then they can choose to do whatever they want.
Interesting, Ruta. I didn't know about that power dynamic coming into play. I'd certainly, my ambition would be to see those service providers on the network, because then you're forcing them to behave appropriately. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also, I wanted to, what can I say, make the most of the fact that to have you guys on, and considering who you like, who you work for and your projects, of sort of picking your brains on potential trends, right? Of support that DePIN projects have needed, right, throughout the last, I would say, 12 to 24 months. Were there any trends there in terms of maybe DePIN projects that you guys support, from off-chain to Eigen to Avail, that they needed, I don't know, technical assistance or a specific partnership in place, like an enabler, and then they were able to scale? Were there any trends there where you just said, hey, like, okay, this is a pattern, I've noticed this, and then I can help other teams? I think this could be a helpful insight for other builders out there who might have an exciting idea, and this nugget of yours could actually help them unlock and access that next phase of growth for them.
Yeah, we've seen a number of teams decide to launch their own Arbitrum Orbit chain. So using our open source L2 or L3 SDK. There's a few reasons for that. Number one, it offers the most customization of any open source chain tech stack. So you can set custom precompiles, you can choose which DA layer, whether it's EigenDA, Celestia, AnyTrust, or posting data as a traditional Ethereum optimistic rollup. Another reason is you don't want to, if you're a DePIN protocol, your users are people that may or may not be associated with the crypto markets at all. If you're on a public chain, whether it be Ethereum, whether it be Arbitrum 1, whether it be some other L2, the fees that you pay are going to be highly correlated to the price of Bitcoin, the price of Ethereum. So why, if I'm running some workload to train a model, should I pay 3, 5, 10 times more because the price of Bitcoin moves 7% today? It has nothing to do with anything that I really care about. I just want to get people cheap, reliable, and scalable performant compute. So we've seen a number of teams do this, including NodeOps with Atlas Network, as well as Spheron Cluster Protocol. Yes, so that's been a welcome development, and I think it makes a ton of sense for these use cases to have their own chains.
Nadir, Naruto, you guys want to add a little more with something that you've noticed yourselves from times Eigen and Avail? It doesn't have to be, I would say, DePIN specifically for projects, but otherwise you can extend the scope if you don't have a specific example in mind. In terms of, based on the history that you've had, right, especially working with us and other DePIN projects, have you noticed any kind of trends or patterns in the kind of support and help that these protocols needed, right, to reach that next phase? And let's just say break into
right.
that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between what Chase and his team are doing. I guess really between what and Naruto is doing as well. Excuse me, I'm literally getting over a flu right now.
No worries.
But because like essentially we're offering primitives that remove the need to kind of have to do some of the work that in the past they had to do. So I guess if you want to build a completely new like L1 or blockchain from the ground up, you have to, do a lot of work. But if you use the OP stack, it just makes it a lot easier. If you want to build out a completely new protocol, like an arbitrary Oracle or any types of service like that from the ground up. It's a lot of work, but people use EigenLayer. And I think that just, being in this space, we're working with a lot of different teams doing a lot of different things. And just as software matures, you have abstractions that start building up that do make it easier because it's like at AWS, like one of the core ideas was this idea of developers shouldn't have to do what we called undifferentiated, like heavy lifting, which was essentially the work that you would do that would not differentiate your product from your competitor, because therefore those were wasted resources. So undifferentiated heavy lifting would be building and optimizing a database versus writing the code that you were going to use to store the information in that database, right? So if you have all these different primitives that you can just like reach for and use, then you can focus on building out and accelerating your actual software development process for your product itself, as opposed to doing all that. So I think there's a lot of similarities between what all three of us are doing, and that's kind of a fun place to be because you can kind of see teams get up and running and build out their idea and launch it more quickly, and then focus on providing more value, I guess, in the sense of like bringing their product to market.
Yes, I agree with Nader, definitely. Me and Nader, we've known each other for a long time, and Eigenlayer is doing really good work in that. Similarly, like even at Avail, whenever like a company, be it a DePIN or any other project, they reach out to us, we try to support them in every way possible. And we have seen last 2 years, a lot of these companies were building infrastructures and DePIN projects, and now you're seeing a little bit shift to actually number one shipping them, number two like people coming to build dApps as well. So at that point you become supporting these dApps. That means that you have shipped the infrastructure in order to scale these dApps, right? And then that's what I'm bullish about. Like even like for Chase, right? They have like Arbitrum Orbit that Avail is integrated with, and it works flawlessly. I have so many devs who come to me and then they say like, oh, that the Arbitrum Orbit and Avail D integration is flawless as compared to Avail DA and XYZ stack because Arbitrum has been shipping seriously. So these are like some of these trends that I've seen where like people have worked massively on the infrastructure side, and now devs or indie devs or anyone else is ready to like ship their dApps or anything else they want to do.
Awesome. I'll delve more into it, but otherwise I think I'll take a lot of your time. Harry mentioned earlier the Messari report, right, on the state of DePIN, which sort of was the inspiration for the name of the session, right? And in it was sort of suggested that there's still adoption gaps, like DePIN has matured, but we're just still not ready, right? So what I wanted to ask you is you can use this as an assist, right, to let your mind run wild for how things will actually play out in 2025. Do you think we're at a cusp of a Cambrian explosion, or do you think it's still too early for, I wouldn't say necessarily say massive, let's just say mass adoption in the context of Web3, so orders of magnitude more compared to last year, which was already a huge year from a growth perspective. But I think we can have another session in 12 months and look back on your takes and see who was the most on the money, let's just say.
I think it's a very hard question, honestly. I think everyone's doing a good work. I would give it to Chase. Chase, what do you think?
I look forward to checking back in 12 months. That's why I love predictions is you can make them and nobody actually bothers to check you in 12 months.
So true.
Yeah, I think, it's depends on the sector, frankly. I think compute will be, to be honest, one of the slower sectors. I think that there are more, I don't want to say important, but there are sectors where demand can be met more readily, particularly on like the energy and the wireless side. So you see this with Glow, you see this with Adrena slash Dawn, you see this with Helium is an extremely good service, and it's becoming more and more popular. I think they have over 100,000 subscribers. So yeah, I see particularly on the energy side, demand being met where there's not currently demand, and also data retrieval. I'm a big fan of the Grass protocol or Grass network, because I think they're solving a problem in a very unique way, and it's also works on like more of a micro payment structure, because I think in crypto everybody's so focused on basically hitting a 50x or hitting a 100x, but all it really takes is micro payments to a number of people to create a large swath of data in the case of Grass. That then becomes very, very valuable, and you can pay people small amounts for the ability to scrape that data.
Interesting. I'd say the demand is definitely there on the compute side. If you look back over the last 4 months, the data showing that the market has grown by 60% on the demand side. So I think I'm pretty bullish on DePIN compute having a good part to play in meeting that demand.
Nadir, you want to add something or
What was
no?
the main prompt? Was it essentially around the adoption of compute?
Now more about how. I mean, we'd love it for you if that's the take for you in terms of what you think it's going to drive. I wouldn't say adoption, right? Because I mentioned the Messiah report that just referenced that there's still some adoption gaps here and there, and that was the lesson from 2024. And just wanted to ask you,
Okay.
as a prediction for 2025, do you think it's going to be compute, or do you agree with Chase? It's going to be more on the energy side. Just your personal take on the matter.
Compute versus energy?
No, or any other sort of use case that DePIN can facilitate.
Okay,
and power.
got it. I again think it's going to come down to the value proposition that just resonates with the average person in this world that is not crypto native. So if you look at what I've thought of as some of the more interesting success stories of the last like 6 months to a year or something like that, they have been products that like somewhat maybe blur the line of like what is a crypto product versus what isn't, and like how people might understand that. So, for instance, Polymarket is a great example of a product that that predicted the news way in advance of everyone else, and it was talked about in all the major news outlets all around the world, but no one knew it was like a crypto product. And in fact, some people didn't even know it was actually almost like a gambling platform. They were hearing about it as a news source. And I think like when we start seeing more actual like use cases that are like in that same perspective, even if it is like on the infrastructure level where people understand the value and are interested in using it simply because it's a high quality product and it has nothing to do with the underlying technology, I think that's going to be where the adoption just happens, and whoever can build out the best products are probably going to win. Um, I think zkTLS is kind of like an area of crypto that's really interesting because it kind of blurs that line as well, where you're able to kind of use a crypto and zk to bring valuable products to the average user, and they don't need to know about any of those underlying pieces, but they're enabled by crypto primitives. And we're already seeing like a lot of top apps in the App Store using software like Opacity Network, which is built on crypto rails. So
Just to piggyback from Nader, I think he's right on the zkTLS side, where like I've seen a few projects in on the zkTLS where like people are getting all kind of datas from everywhere. Now, if you have tons and tons of data in a Web2 world, you can store it on AWS, Azure, wherever. In Web3, if you really want to be decentralized, you can choose to use any of the DePINs, right? Currently a lot of like these Web3 companies still use AWS or like buckets for some things, but right now it's a good opportunity for DePIN project to access that data. For example, be it I think it's Filecoin or IPFS or anything, just to use the data for any kind of data storage and then put it out there. So it just increases the use cases in general. And that's what I think I'm going to be bullish on if there's a combination of zkTLS and then DePIN. Apart from like everything else, I think we can see a lot of like need in the apps or dApps in general because a lot of chains have already launched. Some of them are really doing good, but now they need more and more apps with some innovative solutions. So it might be a good year for apps as well.
Let's hope so. I mean, I think this is going to be the last question as we're wrapping things up. I won't say a rapid fire, but I wanted to hear what you guys think as AI is all the rage as it has been since ChatGPT. And I think everybody talks about it and different angles. Of course, it depends on what your sort of perspective is and what you do. So do you think that DePIN Infra, right, can scale to serve AI companies of any kind, right, of any kind of AI, and not just blockchain workloads? Because I think if we can tackle that and do it successfully, it'll be single-handedly the biggest driving factor behind DePIN's success, right, for the next 12 months. So the floor is yours, guys, and this is I wouldn't say rapid fire, but let me know what you think, and then we'll wrap it up from there.
I've been really diving into AI since 2022. Sold one company, built one app that made a little over 1,000 a month. Not a crazy amount, but it was pretty fun. And then I have one open source project with around like 900 stars. It's been used by like Microsoft and Palantir. Been diving into agents lately, and then Eigenlayer is doing a lot of AI stuff. I think the best take that I've heard on this is more like that it's kind of like electricity. It's one of those things that is just going to be used everywhere, and it's not like, are you going to use AI? It's more of the question, how are you going to use AI and where is it going to be used? And if you look at almost every software company at this point, and it seemed like it happened kind of slow, but it seemed like it happened kind of fast, but it kind of maybe happened kind of slow. Like every software company is actually it's somewhat of an AI company at this point. If you look at all of the most important software that you use, Photoshop, Microsoft, Google, like literally everything is using AI in some form or fashion. So I don't think crypto is any different. I think we're already starting to see a lot of like overlap and a lot of things that you can use that make, I would say, that make AI better or vice versa. So I think verifiable like AI is an interesting thing, especially with agents starting to become more of a thing where you have these autonomous agents like taking actions, but no one can actually verify whether or not the agent is taking that action or a user is taking that action, whether an agent is actually tweeting or a user is tweeting. And when you're just dealing with something fun like a social agent, it doesn't really matter, right? But when you start bringing financial things and bringing financial, I would say, information on chain and within the agent, you have to verify whether or not those things are actually happening. So there's a lot of interesting overlap there. And then also I think that with a lot of the infrastructure that's being run, with a lot of the inference, you're seeing some interesting things happen there with crypto primitives that enable some of these like companies to run lower cost infrastructure as well.
I think we saw this with DeepSeek a few weeks ago, where necessity sort of became the mother of invention, and they had to create a way to create a cheaper way to make a model with limited compute capacity because of tariffs. There's they probably did actually have the chips that they claim to not have, but let's forget that for a second. On the same side with crypto, everything being distributed, there's a lot of advancements being made in terms of distributed training of models. Noose Research is probably the leader here. So you see massive efficiency gains by taking a software approach to what every major company with the capex, with the ability to spend on, massive capex investments, treats as a hardware problem. So, you might see the ability to, or we've seen Noose create distro, which is about 800 times more efficient distributed training than anything that they've seen. Um, so I look forward to the ability to train models using distributed systems. I think that's sort of crypto's edge, is because we don't have the access to massive data centers to 80 $100 billion worth of capital as a single entity. You'll start to see the industry as a whole, or the crypto AI intersection companies, um, create unique ways to innovate around that and, you know, do things like distributed training, like decentralized inference, and so on.
Um, yeah, I think my experience goes like a long way back as well. I did a research in computer vision back in college, wrote a whole paper, and then this is what I've been seeing lately in a lot of like, just the trends that people are using the computer vision for any kind of stuff, right? Yeah, you have Teslas and you have other things. But a new thing that I saw is that a lot of people are using the AI field, AI agents, for a lot of like crypto DePIN projects. So there's like this Whoop kind of band. I think it's called GM Network or Pulse, either one of them. There are two different ones, and they are basically like Whoop band that, like the sports band that people wear it. And they are using AI to, teach how your body works with the band and how the things are. And then they're generating, instead of generating like calories and like figuring out just the calories, they're also working on the energy side. So they termed it like how much energy is consumed, how much you are, generating or something like that. So the point is like a lot of things from AI agents to, just the GPT, LLMs, or computer vision, these things have come a long way. And I think they're just going to boost the DePIN sector as well.
Yeah, and from the NodeOps side, what the NodeOps team excel at is abstracting away some of the technical complexities. So I can't drop too much about this, but like one of the friction points is if you are working with an agent or a model, is actually just picking up and plugging in the compute you need to do that. Like either you're sitting on existing reserve instances or you're saying to yourself, ouch, how much is this going to cost me? So without saying too much, I think there's an opportunity for a service layer on top of the DePIN compute that actually abstracts away some of those challenges that people face when they're just developing and interacting with AI agents.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you off. Definitely more on that soon. Yeah, it's been a very fun and eye-opening session. As we're wrapping things up, are there any CTAs or concluding remarks from your end? And now is the time, and then we'll close that off.
Nothing from my end. If you're giving me an ETH Denver, look forward to seeing you if you're watching.
Yeah, I'll plug our ETH Denver event. We're taking over a Shake Shack again for Arba Burger. So come through, say hello to the team, get some free burgers, free fries, free shakes.
I'm going to be at the Denver too. We're doing a hacker house, so everyone of you are invited there. We'll have like good partners, 10 speakers, and we have like 15 hackers as well. So come, just visit us, see what they're talking about, what they're building, and that's all.
And from the NodeOps side, for all our listeners, if you haven't joined in the testnet campaign yet, come along. There's node points to earn. Some of the tasks are very simple. If you do have a decent amount of compute sitting at home and you're willing to not use that machine, then you can come and add it, or you can just throw on some of your spare over-provisioned cloud compute and throw it in there and earn some points for that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. I mean, the NodeOps team is also going to be ETH Denver next week. We're going to have a booth DePIN Day. So if you're around and you want to chat about all things DePIN or NodeOps or just get in contact, and we'll chat then. Guys, it's been very fun. Look forward to doing this again. And until then, best of luck with everything. And I'll probably see most of you in Denver next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.